I am Amy Voight Xenofos. I'm an attorney at the Johnson Space Center, and on February 1st, 2003 and after, I was named the lead counsel for the Mishap investigation team for the Space Shuttle Columbia recovery. February 1st, 2003, I think our entire office, legal office, came in. We're probably about 15 of us. I think we all came in February 1st just trying to figure out what we were going to do. The first thing we did was try to gather any documentation that we thought we needed to be able to explain how we were supposed to proceed. We started pulling out the contingency plan for the shuttle program, looking through all of that, looking through any sort of NPRs, looking through the regulations and the laws on the investigation, the commission that was going to have to be appointed and how that was going to work. Probably day 2 was when the general counsel and the chief counsel decided that someone was going to have to go out to sit with the Mishap investigation team that had been set up at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. I think by the end of the first day, they had figured out where they were going to house the investigation team based on where the accident occurred, based on where they thought the debris was going to be, and they needed a secure location. So February 2nd, I was told to pack a bag. My office packed a box of office supplies, and they said, here you go. You're going to Barksdale Air Force Base to support the Mishap investigation team. Plan on being out there about a month, and we'll see how it goes. And that was about all the direction I got. In fact, even in the Mishap investigation team guidelines, there really wasn't a lot of stuff written down about what the role of the attorney was going to be on the team. So it was really just a matter of going out there, seeing who was on the team, what was going on, and how I could help. So when I was asked to go out to Barksdale, I had just started at NASA in 2000. I was probably, when this happened, I was probably about, 26, 27 years old. I was only a couple years out of law school, had not had a lot of real world legal experience. And all of a sudden I was asked to be the lead counsel for the investigation team for this huge national tragedy. And when I was asked to be the lead counsel, Paul Pastrick was not kidding. He said, you are our point person in the field. Any questions we have, we're coming to you. Any facts that we need checked, anything that we need run down, we're coming to you. And vice versa. If you see something in the field and you need an immediate response, you are empowered. If you need to go call up I was talking to the deputy CFO for the agency. I was talking directly to associate administrators at headquarters. I was talking directly to the general counsel on a daily basis. And it was something that I, as a relatively new attorney, would never have expected to be allowed to do. But when I was put in that situation, I was told, you are it, and we want you to act, accordingly. We want you to be able to have the full support of the legal team so that the investigation team out in the field can trust you and rely on you. And that was a big part of having I would say a lesson learned of having the whole team work together, was that everybody that was out there was empowered from their own particular perspectives. We all had to know that we could trust each other, that we could rely on what each other were saying. And being able to do that was huge, because I think when I went out to Barksdale, there were folks out there that were operating in the investigation team, I think, that probably had kids my age. And so they were probably looking at me going, one, what am I supposed to do with a lawyer? Because I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with you. It's not in my book to say what I do with a lawyer. But two, you're a kid. How am I supposed to even know that you know what you're doing at being a kid? But I had the full kind of bank of resources behind me, and it made the operation very easy. I think the other thing was that I tried to maintain a low profile. I think as an attorney, one of the important things about, even if you are empowered, you have to know your role. And I think in that case, my role was to help. It was to maintain a low profile and to help make sure that the trains kept running so that the folks in charge, the technical folks and the operational folks, could get the job done that they needed to get done. And if that meant I had to sit in a room during the first week with the medical examiner to make sure that we were typing up the death certificates correctly, and that I was going to go out with the medical examiner to file them, to make sure they got filed in a timely manner, that was what I did to help the team. And it wasn't something we really talked about, and it wasn't very glamorous, but it was immensely important. And to have that ability at, I guess, at my age and experience level was just so wonderful. And ever since then, I've always had such a huge amount of confidence in my abilities because of that early experience. One thing about NASA, prior to this event, and for a lot of years, NASA, at least from the legal community, had been just a lot of different legal offices at different centers. And each legal office was really its own little entity at that center. So when this accident occurred, the general counsel at the time, Paul Pastrick, he wasn't a long-term government employee. He had been brought in from the private sector when Administrator Sean O'Keefe had started. And he had a different mindset when it came to how the different legal offices at the center should work together. And the Columbia accident actually was a really good opportunity to bring all of his ideas and everything he had been talking about together as far as we should be operating as one NASA legal team, that we're all kind of representatives at the different centers of one kind of collective NASA community. And so when Columbia happened, the general counsel, Paul Pastrick, he very much said, yes, the focus, ground zero really is going to be at the Johnson Space Center because of the shuttle program is there, because that was the closest center in proximity to where the accident occurred. But people from all the different centers were expected to pitch in and help. So I was named for the Mishap investigation team. The chief counsel actually at Glenn Research Center, Bill Sikora, was named as the counsel for the CAIB, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. We had attorneys, because I was assigned full-time to Columbia activities. There was another attorney in our office, Donna Schaefer, who was assigned full-time to Columbia activities. We had all sorts of the regular day-to-day stuff, as well as other things that were ramping up that needed to be covered and we needed help with. So we actually had a couple of attorneys from Langley come down to Johnson and help out with document review, all of the documents that were locked down in mission control. We were getting all sorts of Freedom of Information Act requests, media requests for all of that information, and we needed to go through it all before we could release anything. And the general counsel was very aggressive about, we want to be proactive in our information release. Unlike, previous incidents, we really wanted to learn our lesson, and we wanted to put information out as soon as we could to kind of help people understand what was going on, because there was a lot going on. So then when Columbia was going on during the kind of the first month or two, really the kind of the time where there was a lot of activity, we would have regular calls between the general counsel, chief counsel at Johnson, the chief counsel at Stennis Space Center, who they were helping out a lot as well. Kennedy, Bill Sikora from Glenn as the counsel for the CAIB, and we all got together on a regular basis. There may have been others, but we all got together on a regular basis just to talk about what was going on in the day, what were the legal issues that were coming up, what were the things that we needed the legal team to address, were there areas of law that we needed to research, were there documents that we needed to have pulled, things like that. And then the general counsel could decide, how can I best use the resources of the entire team to help with that. I was based at Barksdale for the entire time. I did make trips to Lufkin, especially after the first couple of weeks, because the way it was set up was that, NASA and FEMA were almost co-leading the effort, because we each had different areas of responsibility. Those areas of responsibility kind of drew each of the agencies to a different place. So since NASA's primary focus was collection of evidence, we were based at Barksdale Air Force Base because that was a secure location for us to operate. Now, FEMA was there with us because FEMA, and they were amazing in how they got everything set up. Like by the end of the first day, they had computers, they had phones, they had desks, they had all sorts of, so everything that we needed to be able to start work at Barksdale, FEMA had it ready to go. But now FEMA, the head of the FEMA operation was based in Lufkin because their primary purpose was emergency response to the public that followed the disaster. They were responding to the national disaster declaration that was put out by the president. And so their goal was to respond to the needs of the American public, whether that was, helping with getting law enforcement mobilized to help secure things or to make sure people were safe or to make sure people, if they needed to be evacuated, could be evacuated. So they were based in Lufkin because I think most of the debris and most of the damage was done in Texas, and that was a secure that was a kind of a central location for them. It really was amazing how everything got set up in that big building that we were in at Barksdale that Air Force had set aside for us. So you really had two big main rooms. You had the first main room was what you were talking about, where you have just rows and rows of desks and phones and computers, and that's where people were sitting to actually follow up on all the debris reports that we were getting. We had that, I think it was a 1-800 number that was set up where people could call in and say, I think I found debris, this is where I am, this is what I've got. They could describe what they had. And then we would follow up with every single one of those reports with a phone call to say, give us a little bit more information. Do you have a picture that you could send us? We'd upload those. We'd take a look. People that were at Barksdale could take a look at them. If we didn't have the experts at Barksdale, we could send them back to Johnson, and people could take a look at the pictures and tell us if we thought we were actually dealing with debris. Every report got a pin on this giant map on the wall. And every debris report had to be followed up. And I believe we did that before Barksdale closed down. I believe we followed up on every debris report, at least initially, to find out was there something there or not. And we got some really interesting debris calls, I remember. But so the other room was kind of like a back room where you had kind of the subject matter experts in particular things that were back there working. So you had the medical staff that was on site were back there. You had my desk, the legal desk. You had the public affairs support was back there. Our DOD liaisons were back there. We had folks that were there kind of leading the different teams that were in the field. They had their seats back there. So you had kind of this back room, front room, operations room kind of thing. That was it was really neat for me to be in that kind of environment, because as a lawyer, I don't get to be in those kind of environments a whole lot. So it was really eye-opening to see how everything came together. And it really, in the back room, people had their desks sectioned off by what they did. But everybody, especially when you get up to the front operations room, it didn't matter whether you were NASA or FEMA or DOD or you were local support or whatever. Everybody just, whatever your job was, that's how people gravitated toward each other in that building. And it kind of just brought everybody together. So that was really cool. So going in, I really wasn't sure what the role of the lawyer was going to be. We had the contingency plan. We had laid out in some detail what the mishap investigation team's role was, what their structure was. I think part of it was, none of the documentation had written down how we were supposed to work with FEMA, for example. We had thought through how we would work with DOD. We had agreements in place, longstanding agreements with DOD to be able to say if we need support using assets or facilities, we could leverage that in support of the program. But when it came to FEMA, we had never contemplated that we were going to actually be dealing with a national disaster. And so FEMA had frameworks on how to set up relationships with other governmental entities as part of their responsibility. When they respond to a disaster, they have authority under the Stafford Act to go and work with other governmental entities, state, local, federal, you name it. And so they actually had standardized agreement structures that you could use that said, we're going to work together in this way to do these types of things. And so that helped to be able to leverage what FEMA already had in place for that and to kind of tailor it to the kind of support that we needed, because it really wasn't them tasking us, or at least from the recovery perspective, it wasn't them tasking us to go collect stuff. We had our own independent authority to go and collect this stuff. It was our property. But to be able to work together, to share resources, to come together and respond to the public and their needs was really something new and really something we learned on the fly when we were out there that we hadn't anticipated. I learned a lot about the Stafford Act when I was out there. I knew nothing of it before we walked out there. There was no reason for us to have ever used it before. So that was a unique legal thing that we had to pick up. And FEMA actually was really great, because if we needed to tap the resources of local law enforcement or state law enforcement to go secure a location or to go, talk to folks, we could leverage the relationships that FEMA already had with those guys. We didn't have to figure out a way to create our own. And it worked out really well together. From a legal framework perspective, I think the legal framework for the recovery was actually fairly simple. I think I'm going to probably spend more time talking about the legal framework that we used for the very extensive amount of claims that we got on the back end. We started getting those probably a few weeks after the incident. So with the actual recovery, NASA has the National Aeronautics and Space Act. It's a very flexible authority. It's the law that established NASA, but it also gave us all of the powers and functions that we have today. And it gives us very broad authority to enter into any other transactions we need to in order to carry out our mission. So it says you can enter into contracts, grants, leases, or other transactions. And it just leaves it wide open. It talks about being able to interact with domestic entities, educational entities, other governmental entities, state, local, and federal. It allows you to work with foreign entities. So it's a catch-all that is just so broad. It lets us do almost anything that we would need to do to get it done. And I think even just having the Space Act, we would have probably had enough authority to be able to do everything we needed to do for the recovery. Whether we really had the expertise to be able to understand how to craft legal documents, legal contracts, to be able to interact with everybody the way we needed to in the time frame that we needed to do it, I think would have been hard without having FEMA there with their authority under the Stafford Act, and also their bank of, I guess, template documentation, template agreements on working with other entities and agencies, how to deal with just kind of bringing all those teams together, their ability to just marshal all the resources, computers and phones and desks and things you don't think about when you're trying to put a big team together. I was thinking of one of the things that came up during recovery, and I don't know how much it was experienced here with the investigation team. I know we saw it a lot with recovery because, it was actually folks out in the field that were seeing average, people every day that had seen what had happened. We were getting a lot of offers of gifts. Let us give you free software. Let us give you free, tracking tools. Let us give you free equipment when you're out in the field. Let us give you free food and free ice cream for the people that are out there because, as a morale booster. Let us give you all sorts of free stuff, anything we can do to help. The offers were coming in from all over the place. And, typically we wouldn't, without special authority, we can't accept gifts. It's against federal ethics rules. But as part of the Space Act, we actually had authority written into the Space Act that says we were allowed to accept unconditional gifts. And so I worked with the General Counsel's office at headquarters and the CFO's office to come up with ways that we could accept the gifts, kind of figure out which gifts we could accept those gifts that we could, track the gifts that we got so that we made sure that we were, we knew what we were getting in case we were asked later, we were audited. But we had all sorts of stuff that came in, and that was something that I hadn't expected was, how do we deal with all of that? Back in Houston, with the investigation team, there were a lot of, right after the accident and just for a continuous stream for quite a while, there were a lot of requests, Freedom of Information Act requests coming in and media requests coming in for all sorts of information about the astronauts, information about their families, information about what we did here, about the program, about the vehicle, about all sorts of stuff, video of takeoff, video of all sorts of things. And there was a quick response team that was set up. I think it was the Columbia Accident Rapid Response Team. And they would be the ones to field all of the requests, get them in, prioritize them, figure out how many of them were similar. So when we were pulling information, we knew what information could be used to go toward multiple requests. And all of those FOIA requests had to come through the legal office at Johnson for review before they went out. So that was a huge amount of time. And like I said earlier, we were trying to be proactive in our releases. So not only did we have people reviewing data in response to requests that were already made, we had folks also reviewing data that we thought were going to be subjects of responses or subjects of requests that came in later. So all of that was going on at the same time. And the Freedom of Information Act became a huge authority for us to use during all of this. Probably a few weeks after the accident, we started getting claims from folks, mainly for property damage. I don't recall really any personal injury claims. We did have some claims of damage to livestock. but mainly it was personal property claims. And we had to figure out a way. We had authority under the Space Act to pay a certain amount of claims. We also had the Federal Tort Claims Act, which also gave us authority to pay claims in certain circumstances. And so we had to figure out, of all the claims we were getting, what types of claims were they and what bucket did they fit into, so we knew how to process them. We had to set up a system so if someone came in and said they had a claim, we could say, okay, here's the form you fill out, here's the information we need to support it, here's where you send it. We tried to make it very user-friendly for people. I believe we even put stuff on our website that was going to be very user-friendly for people so that they could submit that claim and get it into us for review as soon as they could. There were also claims that came in from state and local law enforcement agencies and fire departments and all sorts of folks who were mainly in East Texas and Louisiana, who were helping out. And it was February, and they were using up their entire year's emergency response budget to try to help us with our recovery. And so they needed to be made whole because they hadn't planned for this. Those were the types of claims that we didn't really have an easy authority to use, but because FEMA was there and FEMA was working under the Stafford Act, those are exactly the types of claims that they could pay under their public assistance program. And so when we would get claims in, sometimes claims would go to FEMA and they'd send them over to us if they were the property damage kind of claim. We would get claims and send it to them if they were more of the public assistance kind of claims. And we worked together to understand each other's claims processes and really try to kind of work them through the system as best we could. So we learned a lot about the public assistance claim process for FEMA during all of this. And that was a huge deal. One of our first lessons was how to work together as a legal team, because we had never really done that before. We had all the different centers. And I think that lesson that we learned, Paul Pastrick, when he came in before Columbia, had been preaching that he wanted us to come together and work together as one team. None of us had really figured out how to do that yet. And Columbia was the catalyst to bring all of that together. And I think ever since then, we have been one NASA legal team. We do tend to call each other more with questions. We talk to each other more about what's going on at the centers, and we try to share our lessons learned in the legal community even more now than we ever did. And I give a lot of credit to Paul Pastrick and what he was putting together when he got here in order to do that. And I think that's a good lesson we've had. As far as lessons learned in starting up the recovery response, I think the plans we had in place were really good. I think there's a fine line between having enough information to be able to kind of in that time when you're in a state of shock, figure out how do I proceed? How do I organize my brain so I can proceed? And having so much information that you're paralyzed because you're sitting there having to read through just mountains of documents. So I think there was a good level of information to be able to get folks started. And once they were kind of rolling down a path of having to do certain things, then they were able to kind of say, okay, now I understand what the next steps are. Now I understand logically how to proceed. And folks kind of all started to fill in the gaps for each other, after you got past that first day or two of initial, what do we do? So I thought the contingency plans we had in place were good. I thought the mishap plans we had in place, I don't recall having a problem with them. I think we referred to them a lot in the early days to figure out how to get started. But once, at least from the recovery side, once we got in there with the other agencies, with local law enforcement and setting up the search patterns and the search squares and getting the teams out there, I think we tended to put a lot of the plans, we put the plans down and we said, okay, now we've found a way to make this work. We found a rhythm to make it work. And that's kind of how we proceeded after probably the first few days of just getting everybody together. In this instance, when we had an incident that occurred over a large piece of land that affected a lot of people, I don't know how we would have done it without FEMA, to be honest with you, on the recovery, because they just brought such an enormous amount of experience in how to mobilize quickly. They brought such an amount of resources to the table on how to kind of get local and state law enforcement in and working. That experience working with them was invaluable. One of the lessons learned, I would say, particularly from the claims side of it, was the importance of private investigators and looking through the number of claims we got from Columbia. Normally, we don't do a lot of legwork on our own to follow up with claims. We take the evidence that's given to us when we get a claim filed and we proceed with that. But in this case, we wanted to be very forward-leaning in how we treated claimants and how we tried to pay out claims. And so there were so many people from very rural areas that were filing claims and maybe didn't have the wherewithal to be able to take a picture and send it to us of what they had of their damage that was caused. And so we hired private investigators that were local to the area to go out, take pictures for us, take witness statements for us, be able to bring that back so that we could complete the claims review process properly. So that was a lesson learned that I didn't expect, was that, you can't always just rely on, in situations like this, the folks that had the claims to give you everything you needed to be able to follow the process. The other lesson I would say that I learned was just to be open-minded to the different types of authority and the different types of situations you might encounter. I had mentioned before, all of our contingency plans, we talk about what NASA is going to do and what authorities we have to proceed. We had never anticipated having a disaster like this over large swaths of land and how to respond to that in a timely fashion. And so FEMA automatically came in because that was part of their independent role. And just being open to working with them and being able to have them, even though there were some folks, I think, that wanted to say that NASA was in charge. It was a co-leadership thing. And from the legal side, if FEMA had template contracts that they could use to get the resources of state and local agencies or even other federal agencies like EPA and get those mobilized in a expeditious fashion so that we could use them, by all means, go ahead. I think that sounds great. And, I learned a lot from being able to see how they had all of these templates already set up and situated so that we could just leverage them. And the other lesson learned, I would say, is I knew how flexible the Space Act was. I think I got to see an even different side of the Space Act, just how flexible it was. I thought I knew, but there really was a lot of flexibility in there that I had no idea that we were able to leverage. And it was great. Like I said, I don't think we could have done it all in the time frame we needed it to do without FEMA. But I think we really had all of the authority we needed in the Space Act. I believe when we were looking at the contingency plans, a lot of them had been written, the ones that we had at NASA, they had been written after the Challenger accident. And the Challenger accident was very different response-wise from the Columbia accident, because one was over water and one was over land. And so the amount of people and the risk of affecting people with the breakup of the orbiter was magnitudes different. Over land, we had the ability to do some real damage to property. And honestly, it was a real surprise that we actually didn't hurt anybody. I think it was probably the fact that it was on a Saturday morning and it was early that might have played into it. But we were really lucky from that perspective, that really the bulk of the claims we had to deal with were property damage claims. I think the authorities that we had were good authorities to be able to handle all of that. It was really just a matter of, we had never had to process the amount of claims, the magnitude of the claims we got before. And so we didn't have a very efficient process to do that. Our contingency plans and our investigation, like our policies on investigations, we don't talk a lot about claims, at least not that I recall. We talk about preserving evidence for the investigation, and we talk about trying to be able to use that evidence to find the root cause of an incident, but we don't talk about having to preserve that evidence for potential future litigation very much. And that's what we dealt with in this situation, is we were having to use the evidence and information that we got as part of the recovery efforts to match up to claims. If someone said that I had damage to my home as a result of Columbia debris, we had to be able to go back to the database that held all of the debris reports and be able to see, was there a report of debris at that location? Was debris found at that location? Could we match it up so that we could go and pay that claim? And so it worked out that because stuff was being captured and retained for investigation purposes, we were still able to use it to be able to process the claims, although it hadn't really been, I don't think it had been contemplated too much when the contingency plans were put together. I think when the actual incident occurred and we were putting those debris databases together and all of that information, I think it was very much, in my mind at least, that we were going to have to use that information to deal with claims. And so I think when we were on the ground putting stuff together, we had that in our mind. But I think as far as the contingency planning and investigation procedures go, we were pretty silent on what we did with the investigation and how we gathered and maintained evidence would be used for potential litigation and down the road. I think one lesson learned that would be good coming out of this, at least from the claims perspective, because we don't have a lot of information in our contingency plans or in our mishap investigation procedures about the potential for litigation coming out of a mishap. I think it would be good to put something in there, at least in the section about collecting and maintaining evidence, to talk about at least a passing reference to collecting it and maintaining it in such a way that it could be used to support the defense of potential litigation down the road, at least keeping in mind what the various statutes of limitations might be for types of claims and making sure that we collect evidence and we maintain it in a fashion for a certain amount of time, at least to be able to use it for that if it should come up. My key takeaway from the investigation and the legal support was how impressive it was to see everybody come together so quickly. People didn't talk about what center they were from or who was in charge or anything like that. It was very much a coming together of what can I do to help? How can I respond to this? And everybody really came together, not only to from the legal side to do the research that was needed, to do all the document review that was needed. Legal work is really boring. It's lots of reviewing of documents in windowless rooms. It's lots of asking questions and investigating, but it can be very boring. And the fact that folks were coming out of the woodwork in the legal community to come and do that boring work was really impressive. So I think my big takeaway from that was we really became a legal team as a result of this accident. It was probably one of the silver linings of the tragedy was that we now, I think, and even today, we still work together fairly seamlessly, I think, between the different centers on various legal issues across the agency.